Hello, and welcome to the webinar, How to Establish a Purchase Services Program. We're really excited you could join us today, and we have some great content in store. Let's first start with introductions. My name is Lindsay Wise, and I am your host. We are lucky to be joined by two experts from Conductive's Strategic Sourcing Department with a combined 20 years of sourcing and category expertise. Both Anna and Malia have implemented purchase services across the country, and they both bring a wealth of knowledge to the topic. And what do I mean when I use the word program and purchase services program? Rather than tackling one off projects like a contract expiration or bringing a category to RFP, what we really want to get folks thinking about is how to create an infrastructure to tackle this broad category of purchase services as operational spend and be able to scale your impact. So, why take a programmatic approach? Hospitals across the country need cost savings fast. The rising costs of care, coupled with declining reimbursement rates, are taking a toll on patients and providers alike. However, affordable patient care can be reached through cost reductions, which can be attained through a program like the one we'll outline for you today. Over the years, we at Conductive have come to understand what elements are critical to running a flawless purchase services program, and to celebrate the fact that more and more providers are prioritizing purchase services within their organization. In this webinar, we are pulling back the curtains on our own approach. With that, I will turn it over to Anna to kick us off with the first item on our agenda, the importance of establishing a support system.
Thanks, Lindsay. I appreciate it. So, the very first step to take when creating a purchase services program is to establish a support system with buy in and approval from folks throughout your organization, including committees. Beyond creating a consensus around process, committees can also serve to help ensure what the needs of each facility are correctly articulated across larger organizations. Malia, what does your experience show here?
Anna, building a strong and supportive team from the top to the bottom is incredibly important to ensure success for any given category. And after this is done, it makes it easier to build out goals and processes. It's really tough to achieve any of those goals without this type of support. So one of the best practices that we advocate with our customers is to take a three-pronged approach by involving the C-suite, executive sponsors, and category stakeholders. Leveraging this executive support can help drive decisions from the top down and ensure engagement and participation across departments.
Yeah. Executive sponsors are also incredibly valuable to have. So these individuals have a vested interest in a given category and can drive decisions outside of supply chain. Another way to look at this is that they operate as like a conduit when negotiations become complicated, as well as advocate for contract improvements in any given category.
And most importantly, stakeholders are the people who work in this category on a day-to-day basis. What areas are impacted by the service? The involvement of stakeholders at this level, along with their input and feedback, helps vendor selection and contract management be an easier process.
So, we recently conducted a poll where we asked healthcare organizations to name where does the decision making power lie within your sourcing process?
Yeah, and some of the results that we received back showed that really all of the above, but largely stakeholders were mainly in charge of that decision-making process. And, I something kind of related. I worked with a large health system, several years ago that I was doing a bid for their environmental services or their EVS services. And one of the main cost drivers in EVS is the FTE counts. So, how many people do you need on-site cleaning? We had suppliers come in and they gave presentations to the customer stakeholder group on their proposal, and they walked through the proposed staffing levels. And this particular supplier explained that as part of the model to reduce FTEs needed, was they were going to ask the nursing staff to empty the trash containers in the patient rooms, which, obviously not the best use of their time.
Interesting. What was the reaction in the room to that presentation?
To say the least, it was not well received. But luckily, the customer committee had a nursing staff representative involved, not only in these presentations, but throughout the sourcing process. So they were allowed to voice their disagreement with the model, not only directly with the supplier, but with the other committee members as well. If a decision like this had been made without the nurses' input, it was clear it would cause a huge issue when trying to implement. So now that we know how to establish a support system, I think it's time to start thinking about objectives. The supply chain adds tremendous value to the sourcing lifecycle, but you want to make sure you're not operating in a vacuum. So part of including other stakeholders is being able to set goals for every project. And you'll want to take into account all the nuances for every different category and location.
So in collaboration with your newly appointed support team, just ask yourselves, what do you want to accomplish? Do you want to increase savings? Do you want to achieve on-contract spend compliance? Efficiently process expiring contracts? If you set a clear set of objectives in developing KPIs to measure performances, it'll help you guide your sourcing priorities within your own program.
Mm-hmm. And another factor to consider may include any organization-wide goals set by executive leadership. Mm-hmm. Does your organization have savings or contract goals, or how do they come into play with what you are trying to do here? When setting those objectives, though, don't lose sight on what's most important, and that really is the total supplier value. While price is a major consideration in any negotiation, other important factors to consider when developing an RFP include things like service level guarantees, favorable legal terms, and the total cost of ownership, really, of a particular service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, purchase services have to be looked at uniquely when determining which supplier is offering the best value. For products, it's easier to compare a widget between supplier A and supplier B, but when you look at services, the lowest price isn't always the right choice for the organization.
Right. That's so true. A lot of these agreements have staff on site who may or may not be interacting with patients. A low-cost provider may be able to charge you less because they are paying minimum wage with little to no benefit packages offered, which can lead to a higher turnover rate. If the supplier is constantly having to try and hire and bring in new people for that service, it can really lead to a lot of service issues and therefore complaints from patients.
Yeah, I have also seen suppliers who weren't awarded a contract because a hospital thought it would reflect poorly on them if the wages were so low. So for any category, you're going to want to take a step back and look at the full picture of the service offering to help determine who offers the best value.
We have more industry survey results in. When renegotiating contracts, which factors are most important to you, the healthcare providers in the industry? Malia, can you go over the results?
Yes. So we saw results that are really split between cost savings and contract term improvement. In my experience, there were a lot of opportunities for savings to be had for non-price factors and strengthening contract terms. I was recently evaluating a pest control contract, and our team was able to identify several additional terms for inclusion that spoke directly to savings and other ways other than line item pricing. It included pricing out services that weren't on the contract, which would have otherwise needed to be quoted out ad hoc, and instituting a pest prevention guarantee. So, a lot of those other factors are really important for the final result.
Yeah, it's a really good point. One of the reasons it may not be looked at as much when you think about some of these other values is, you may not know them for that particular category. So, where do I even find these? How do I know how to measure that? Why do I even need them? There is a real opportunity for KPIs to improve your overall quality of service. By writing them in, you put more responsibility on the supplier to live up to their service quality.
Yeah, based on our experience, approximately only 20% of purchase services contracts have KPIs with penalties associated written into their agreement. That can be an issue, particularly for those categories that have direct patient interactions. Joint Commission requires that you're monitoring the service quality for those services, and the best way to do that is through KPIs in the agreement.
And I would say like 80% is a really large number of contracts without KPIs defined.
Mm-hmm.
And what that tells us is there is room on the table to improve the way. And it's not just a quality control measure. If you think about it, without a penalty written in, your quality terms really become an empty requirement.
So let's talk a little bit about KPIs. So here we've broken them down into a few categories: cost, quality, and outcomes. And you'll want to consider how KPIs may vary by category.
Mm-hmm. And, not to be pessimistic, but you want to think proactively about what could go wrong. What could impact my ability to hit my budget, such as, are there fluctuating expenses? For something like food nutrition services, you have a per patient day rate, but then you have expenses like floor stocks or catering that can fluctuate by day. Are you monitoring those? Who is signing off on catering? I've seen some organizations have different tiers that would require different levels of sign off depending on who ordered it and what type of food was served. But it's the supplier's responsibility to track that and make sure you aren't getting hit with an unexpected bill each month.
Yeah, good point. And those are the types of critical questions to address across all of the categories. Furthermore, it's important that you communicate your KPIs with your stakeholders so that they're made aware of contractual obligations and are given the opportunity to provide qualitative performance feedback for the supply chain to address.
So we've identified our core team. We have a clear idea on who we want to measure. So let's talk about building a vetted process. So how do you even begin to employ a sourcing strategy when there is so much to manage? An often overlooked component that's key to developing a purchase services program is having a single system of record. That is one place where all the contracts, data, and process info reside.
We've helped supply chain teams that are lean on staff to develop high efficiency programs with the support of contract centralization efforts. But whether your purchasing team is centralized or decentralized, you can most effectively manage contracts when all the documents reside in one place. This just allows for added visibility and transparency.
Mm-hmm, right. So, I once worked with an organization and they were telling me a story of one of their suppliers. It was a small company who just operated locally. And when this customer decided that they wanted to take a look at the category and think about sourcing, they went hunting for the contract. And no one could find a copy in their organization, which, unfortunately is not really that uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
So they went and asked the supplier, and the supplier said, like, oh, yeah, I have a copy of that. I keep those in the back seat of my truck. So this organization's contract had been filed away for years in some supplier's car. Obviously, probably not your best program management system.
Very secure. So one of the first challenges you'll run into is, where do I even begin? How do I quickly determine which categories and contracts to focus on? There are an abundance of purchase services categories and contracts to work on with very little time and resources. But there are a couple of ways to tackle this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One way is thinking about perhaps setting dollar thresholds for projects to work on.
Mm-hmm.
So setting this threshold will weed out some of the smaller, less impactful contracts. Some organizations I've personally worked with have dollar thresholds set that determine if something must go out to bid or not. So, maybe anything above 100,000 annually must be RFP'd. Anything under that threshold can either be renegotiation or like set to auto renewal. Malia, did you use any of these rules like when you were working at hospitals?
We didn't have anything formal at the time, but we focused on the larger spend items. In working with some of the more municipal owned entities, that they might have additional requirements as well.
Right, that's a really good point. Another approach would be to address spend using a 3-tier system. So you kind of think about it this way. So tier A, that's your big spend categories with high impact to the organization. Everyone's probably aware of these. Tier B, in the middle, you will have some cost savings opportunities, and the contracts may be less complex in nature to source. And then you have tier C, where all the small spend lies, and that you can think of that as like ongoing maintenance. So you may find that your organization may or may not have already identified everything in the A categories and are managing them well. Example of these may be your food nutrition services or waste. The next area then to focus on would be those B categories. And then anything in tier C, like I said, ongoing maintenance, just simply checking a box to like make sure there is in fact a contract in place and the service hasn't expired.
Another way is to use a supplier partner to help you focus on where to start. This could be an analytical tool or a consultant. These companies can provide a unique perspective on which categories they typically see savings with. So they can take a look at your contracts that have upcoming expirations and tell you based on historical data which ones could likely yield savings and which ones you're better off just extending out.
So after figuring out which categories will serve as your starting point, that transitions us to another core element of a successful purchase services program, and that's employing multiple sourcing strategies. A traditional RFP process may not be right for every situation, especially those smaller contracts.
By asking important questions up front, you can determine if another approach should be employed. Beyond RFPs, you can consider direct incumbent negotiations or just making sure all the contracts in a given category expire at the same time.
When you think about it, what would impact your decision to go with a certain strategy? So is it a dollar threshold or above, like RFP, as we just mentioned? Or like maybe for those incumbent negotiations, so your stakeholders are happy, market research indicates your contract and pricers is competitive, so let's just stick with who we're using today.
Looking back to our survey results, we discovered how many contracts on average are being put out to bid. It looks like the results came back that less than 20% of contracts are being put out to bid, and rather the majority of contracts are just being renegotiated. Malia, why do you think that is?
That's a good question, Lindsay. I've seen hospitals prioritize renegotiation over putting something out to bid. It's not surprising because when you deal with the complexity of every purchase service category, it is really difficult to put all your resources into implementation. An example of that is that a customer once told me that a hospital they worked with had leadership who actually discouraged the use of RFPs because they didn't think that they saw results. But industry standard across the board really shows us that this isn't true. A lot of people are using RFPs because it allows you to negotiate terms and pricing. And I'm happy to report more and more hospitals are implementing sourcing and RFPs into their everyday processes. By using and creating mechanisms that support the momentum of your sourcing life cycle, like identifying categories of savings, creating guidelines about when and where to use certain sourcing strategies, your supply chain will be positioned to create a larger impact with its initiatives.
Yeah, so beyond identifying a process to manage your purchase services on an ongoing basis, it's really important to get the resources in place to help you reach success. Most purchase services teams we've encountered are underinvested.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to get creative in how we can help provide value without increasing that FTE headcount. So what mechanisms do you have in place to gather data and to move your program forward in terms of people and process?
I think the concept of timeliness is going to be key here too. You want to build a process that gives the ability to set alerts that serve information in an actionable time period that's pertinent. A key resource for information gathering and market intelligence is benchmarking. Benchmarking for purchase services is important to utilize market research so you can understand what the opportunities are. This really ties back to how to decide what categories to go after. You want to make sure that you're using your resources wisely and that they're focused on the best opportunities to improve pricing and service levels.
I just worked with an organization who was looking at bidding their managed print services agreement. And, that's a large spend category that draws attention given most everyone in the organization uses a printer at some point. They decided to have a benchmark report run first before determining how to move forward. And that report came back and showed that their pricing was competitive given the current market conditions. So instead of wasting their efforts sourcing something that may not yield much value, they decided to focus their resources on other categories.
So this could be helpful in setting roadmap strategies, lowering costs, and committing people to the right projects at the right time.
And you can create and scale sourcing projects through the support of technology. One of the common themes I've seen working with hospitals is the lack of automation for tracking things like contract terms, savings, etc. The use of Excel spreadsheets is one of the most commonly used tools, and that creates a lot of issues given how manual that is.
Definitely. Someone can accidentally delete information. Maybe it becomes corrupted. Oh my gosh. Then you're running to IT and you try to figure out a backup version somewhere. It feels like the ideal goal should be to create an audit trail from initial request to RFP to the negotiation process and through the award of a contract. After that, you can use the transparency to monitor spend activity and reduce off-contract expenses through insights from the analytics. Anna, do you use technology platforms to manage ongoing initiatives? And if so, how?
Yeah, technology has been so key to tracking red lines, but it doesn't always capture the table conversations, during which some of those red lines may have occurred. Once I was facilitating a contract negotiation with a hospital partner, and their selected supplier tried to go back on a term that was previously negotiated. But it was so great because we had this audible trail of communication because we used an online RFP platform. So we had a record of their original response. And so long story short, the vendor agreed to the original, much more competitive term.
Another point is, how do you measure contract compliance? I've seen everything from an informal intent to comply, meaning a facility says, we promise we won't contract with anyone else, to the tedious but necessary work of getting AP reports on a monthly basis and comparing spend across vendors for a specific category. Having an automated tool that'll show you where that rogue spend is hanging around will really assist your team with making sure all that hard work they did and putting in a new agreement isn't going to waste.
One final market insight. Our industry data shows us that most organizations have a partial focus on purchase services, meaning that full time employees are stretched across various tasks and responsibilities, leaving purchase services optimization as more of a side project. Anna, in thinking about successful programs we've seen to date, what are some qualities of those effective departments?
Yeah. Those poll results don't really surprise anybody, I think, in the fact that these teams they're stretched and they're asked to do, multiple things, and purchase services is just like a small piece of what they're asked to focus on. But for those organizations where I have seen huge success and strides, it's where they've been able to get a dedicated team in place. We worked with one organization in particular where they used technology to identify the potential savings and made that ROI business case to the C-suite leadership to help staff that new team. And it's made a huge difference in the total savings that their organization has been able to achieve because they have people focused on it.
Wow, that's incredible. So a supply chain team is unlikely to have dedicated people working on purchase services. As Anna said, they're usually handling purchase services in addition to some capital or other consumable categories. So it's really important to establish and train on purchase services specific processes. It's such a unique animal, can't be run on the same path as equipment. For example, an organization may say, I need 50 new hospital beds. Hey, supply chain, go source this. So supply chain doesn't have to monitor expiration dates of agreements because it's a one-time purchase.
Right, exactly. So for items such as consumables, a lot of those items are to go on a GPO agreement, so they don't have to be fully sourced at the local level. The GPO coverage for most primary GPOs is light in the space of purchase services because the majority of these categories need to be contracted locally and involve a high level of stakeholder engagement. Malia, what is your experience in this area?
I worked with a health system that didn't have anyone dedicated to purchase services. It was thrown in with IT, a few other categories that really didn't lend itself to easy line item pricing negotiations. When I see more and more hospitals have entire teams dedicated to sourcing and purchase services, I really admire the strategy of that leadership team and realizing that these are key categories that really haven't been touched. But, even if there isn't a dedicated purchase services team or individual, it's really key to know your strengths and to have a deep pocket of resources for any potential weaknesses.
Right. I mean, just look at the volume of categories listed here. And this is just a summary. I mean, it would be impossible to hire someone with expertise in even a small percentage of the full list. So, one way to optimize the staffing you have is to look at what tools do you have to make those rote tasks take less time so your team can spend more time doing research, analyzing data, and managing sourcing events. Technology plays a really big role here. You just have to find the right solution for your team.
Another key to having a successful purchase services program is to really build your supplier roster. Do you know what local suppliers currently service that category? Ultimately, who you award a contract to will hinge upon your understanding of their capabilities, their capacity, their geographic coverage of the supplier pool. And when you enrich your supplier roster with new vendors that can cover maybe a greater geographic area or offer additional competitive incentives, you get better services, you get better contract terms, and you get better accountability for the price you pay.
Right. And, how do you find suppliers? So do you have any partners that can provide market research to tell you what the landscape looks like? One of the demands I see a lot is trying to find quality suppliers. And, while almost everyone asks for a reference in an RFP, we know that those are always going to be their very best customers.
And even if you ask for recent accounts that they may have lost, you'll likely be hearing from a system who moved away from the supplier at no fault of the supplier.
Right.
Maybe it was a political decision. So that really begs the question, how do you get honest, reliable feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a good place to start is by simply building in a performance feedback element into your program. So at the very least, you are up to date on current supplier performance. Speaking to your peers at industry events can also provide unguarded feedback on other suppliers. So, in summary, there are so many ways to build an effective purchase services program. And, the specifics really vary by the needs of each unique health system. However, what makes these programs unique is the infrastructure in which they are built upon. So, when used correctly, the 8 elements on this checklist will aid your efforts and help you achieve your cost savings.
Whether you're beginning to address your purchase services spend or looking to scale the success of your existing program, we really encourage you to look to your peers to learn about their challenges and benefits of taking your purchasing life cycle to the next level.
We did receive a few questions that we will address with you offline. But if you have any questions about how Conductive helps hospitals optimize their contracting potential and purchase services, please feel free to reach out to us for more information on those best practices. To see some of our latest technology and GPO enhancements, you can request a demo by visiting conductive.com. That is it for today's webinar. I'd like to thank everyone for your participation in joining today's call. And thank you so much to Anna and Malia for your insights. We'll see you next time with the upcoming episode in our webinar series, Best Practices for Benchmarking Services. Thank you and have a great day.